essentially what we had to do was we had to find this lamb, a lamb that had been killed first. And then we had to look, there were a few indications. They wanted to look at the hooves to see if they had dirt on it to kind of indicate that it had been up and walking around. They would look in the mouth to see if the tongue had been pulled out. So that's one of the first places an eagle wants to go, is they want to eat the tongue out when they kill a sheep or a lamb. And if they're stillborn, then they go into rigor mortis pretty quickly, so it's not very easy for an eagle to actually get into the lamb's mouth and pull that tongue out.
Hey everyone, welcome back and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Falconry Told podcast, brought to you by the fine folks at Marshall Radio Telemetry, the creators of the most carefully engineered and reliable tracking system available. For more information on their GPS systems and other fine telemetry products, go to marshallradio.com. And this week's episode brings you all another couple of fellow Indiana natives, being Tanner Baird and Dane Erickson. Tanner is currently studying law at the University of Texas and has graduated from Texas A&M with a bachelor's in animal science. And Dane is also going to Purdue University studying agricultural economics and political science. And both of these guys were fortunate enough to be a part of the eagle depredation study that occurred in Wyoming this past year. And I thought it would be cool to have them share their experiences with us and kind of tell us a little bit about what all went into the study and how they went about doing it. So without further ado, I give you all Tanner Baird and Dane Erickson. All right, and 3, 2, and 1. Boy, today turned out to be a horribly crappy day. Today was supposed to be another wonderful Indiana meat day, and unfortunately, the guest speaker, he lives in Canada, Lynn Oliphant, and he ended up having to cancel today because it was negative 5,000 degrees in Canada, and, 100% rain in Lafayette, and all that kind of good stuff. But fortunately, our guest this week, Tanner, agreed to go ahead and meet with me anyway, because I had to still come up and get about 30 pigeons or so from someone who's relocating them. And so fortunately, I was still able to kind of salvage some productivity for the day, even though it turned out to be a crappy day. But anyway, so how's things going, Tanner?
Going well. I guess if we can't have a falconry meet, doing a falconry podcast is just about as good as we can get. So happy to be here.
Yeah. So it's a nice consolation prize.
I think
sure,
so.
For
Absolutely.
sure. And we also have a buddy here with you, correct?
Yes, sir.
By the name of
Dane Erickson.
Cool. So, Dane, you said that you've been around falconers and everything. You just not ever really decided to take the plunge yet. It's just kind of something that you're just subjecting yourself to continually because of just, sheer self-punishment. Or
That's about right. So Tanner and I kind of grew up together, and I'd go hunting with it. I'd go hunting with him, but most of the hunting I do is with a gun. My background in the Eagle Project, though, that we did out in Wyoming is more from a livestock side.
Oh, okay, cool. So we'll get into that here in just a little bit. But so, Tanner, if I remember right, you said you're going to college in Texas, right?
Yes, sir.
Which university was that again?
So I'm at the University of Texas right now.
Okay.
All my A&M friends will probably rib me for saying that. But yeah, University of Texas School of Law right now.
Okay.
Did my undergrad at Texas A&M, and then before that went to a junior college called Casper College in Wyoming for 2 years. But yes, sir, in Texas right now, living in Austin.
Wow. Okay, so you're already pretty well traveled then for someone as young as you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a chance to live in a lot of different places, practice falconry in a few different places as well. So it's been fun. I've really, as far as falconry goes, I started when I was 16 in Indiana. I got to practice it for 2 years here, then went to Wyoming for 2 years, and then College Station for 2 years. So I never got to hang around long enough to really, I think, figure out how to do falconry in that area real well. So I've kind of dabbled in a little bit every now and then. But yeah, fortunately haven't stayed anywhere real long to really fly a bird for a long, extended period of time.
Gotcha. So it's a lot of, release at the end of the season kind of thing, or did you have any captive bred birds or anything that you took from state to state, or?
Right. So I've only actually flown 3 birds. I've been a falconer for 6 or 7 years now. I I took a couple years off when I was in college just because I thought I at various times I didn't have the habitat for the bird, didn't have time for a bird. I started in Indiana with the red tail that I flew for 2 years. That was actually the only wild-caught bird I ever flew. Unfortunately, he died just a couple weeks before I was set to release him. Had an incident in the weathering area for him, and just kind of one of those freak accidents, and I wasn't home and around for whatever reason that day, and lost him a few days after that. But after him, I went to Wyoming. Everybody told me I want to have time to fly a bird in college, and I realized that I was sitting around watching a lot of TV my first year of college, so I ended up getting a captive bred Harris hawk. Flew her on jackrabbits in Wyoming. That was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed that. But then I moved to Texas, and at least in the area of Texas I was in, there wasn't the best habitat for rabbits. Fire ants really did a number on the rabbit population down there. The undergrowth was so dense in any woods that I could hunt, it was difficult to go after squirrels. So I ended up selling that bird just because I didn't have the game to fly her. And then the next bird I got was my hand-me-down falcon, as I referred to earlier. Ended up getting that bird off Raptor's Nest because in College Station we didn't have rabbits or squirrels or a lot of game species, but one thing we did have were duck ponds. So I thought if I could get this older falcon going on ducks, I think that would be a lot of fun. Didn't quite have the success that I wanted to with them. I needed to figure out some more quirks of the whole long wing deal a little bit better. So
a lot of them.
Yeah, there are.
There's about 20 extra quirks you got to go through, and luckily I find them more fun. Not everybody does. For the same reason why I don't really have much interest in flying accipiters, I can understand why there'd be a lot of people not want to fly falcons.
Right.
That being said, I love falcons. I love their personality, but I totally get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like I said, I trained that prairie, and then it just died suddenly on me. Yep. And, I had him about ready to hunt where I wanted, but this one that I've got now, this peregrine Giersaker cross, so it's kind of weird, tri-bred almost. But,
right.
But I've got him just about ready
right
at this point.
Going up to 1,000 feet now, right?
Yeah, over 1,000.
Yeah,
on the drone, which
right.
The drone part is the easiest part. It's the transitioning from that to hunting that's difficult. But anyway, go back to the fire ant thing real quick. What was the deal with that? Explain that a little bit more, because how did the fire ant thing affect the population of your quarry?
Yeah, so I hope I'm not just spewing nonsense on here, but it's
I'll stop you if you're spewing nonsense. It's all good.
It's been repeated enough. I think it's at least a good rumor. So what I've been told is that essentially when rabbits are born, they're not real mobile. They don't have fur yet, and they're real vulnerable to fire ants finding them when they're young. So the fire ants are so prevalent in kind of the eastern area of Texas that I was living in that what I was told at least is that the rabbit numbers were down because essentially when they were born, they had a pretty long window where fire ants could find them and eat them. But I can't say there were hardly any rabbits that I could find in the area of Texas I was in for one reason or another.
Well, just because I'm a geographical idiot. So where exactly is Texas? The part in Texas you were living, you said is still kind of close to the university or whatever. I don't even know where the University of Texas is. I mean, honestly, I'm so out of the loop with a lot of the colleges and everything.
Right.
So yeah, kind of go into that a little bit.
So when I was at Texas A&M, that's in College Station, which is about 2 hours east of Austin. So it's not really eastern Texas. It kind of shares some geographic similarities with eastern Texas. A lot of the grass is the same. A lot of the landscape looks pretty similar, and they have a lot of fire ants. So game-wise, it wasn't great for what I was wanting to do in that area of the country. Living in Austin now, I'm further west. I think the game's a little bit better there. I'm closer to the hill country where I could go out west and maybe find some jackrabbits. But I ended up selling my falcon once I started law school. I figured out pretty quickly. The last couple of weeks of law school, I didn't see my apartment in the daylight. I was always at the school studying, so I figured did not have time to do a falcon justice. So I ended up selling him to a guy pretty shortly after that. But
gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it's any kind of degree like that for sure is very intensive. I mean, I went to school for respiratory therapy. I don't know if you've heard me mention it previously before, but yeah, there was times where I could could remember just thinking, I don't even know how to think right. Functioning was almost kind of like on autopilot for a while. It was kind of weird, but health professions, law, any kind of stuff like that. It's very, I totally understand, in other words. So.
Yeah, if I've learned one thing, it's when you turn on the cable news programs and folks talk about that, this thing or that thing is easy from a constitutional law perspective, they're wrong. There's nothing easy about constitutional law or law in general, I don't think. So
yeah, I never was under that illusion whatsoever. Yeah. So I'm not really sure how many people could get suckered into thinking that. I mean, if you've ever just read basic legal jargon, so I also have been involved in music for a long time, and whenever I briefly learned even just about the music business contracts and stuff like that, I was just like, I was blown away by just how much legal jargon can be put into an agreement that is totally incomprehensible, and what you can comprehend could feasibly be null and void later in a contract just by other jargon that's unreadable, negating the jargon before it. Just to throw a little loophole into the agreement and stuff. And so kudos to you for wanting to go into that. That sounds terrible and miserable to me, but to each their own. But what exactly are you wanting to branch into more conservation type stuff with that, or how are you wanting to use that?
So ideally, if I can, my background in college I was an animal science major. I graduated from Texas A&M with an animal science degree. I looked at a lot of production livestock systems, ways of basically creating or growing protein and producing protein in this country. I would like to work somehow adjacent to that if I can. I think that in a lot of ways I kind of have a foot in each world, because I would hunt on BLM land where there are cattle there. I would, I understand the need to produce food for people. I also understand some of the challenges that conservation's facing. I really think the only way that we're going to do anything positive in both of those worlds if we kind of work with each other, whereas it seems to be a lot of the ag people are yelling at the conservation groups are yelling at the ag people. And I think there's a whole lot of room for us to both reach our priorities on that. So whether that's working eventually in-house for an ag company or I don't know, I guess we'll see. Man plans, God laughs. We'll see how it turns out.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare. Anyway, you said that you pretty much... I'm addressing Dane right now. So you said that you pretty much grew up around that world, though, right? As far as raising livestock, and I'll go into that a little bit and kind of then tie that into how you got to know Tanner and kind of your relationship then.
Sure. We had a little bit of everything growing up. I grew up on a goat dairy near Lafayette, Indiana, and we also had a lot of poultry. So the poultry is how I met Tanner. Tanner and I were always both interested in birds of prey and otherwise, so we raised pigeons, chickens, ducks, geese, and showed them in 4-H. And then Tanner and I were talking about birds, and I found out he was getting into falconry, and then we started hunting together. I kind of took a different approach. I was always I didn't want to invest the time and not end up having enough time for a bird. So I kind of went a different route with the hunting and, hunt deer with a gun like a normal person, I'll say.
People that have a much higher success rate with what they're doing. Yeah, I understand.
So that's kind of my background with that. And then can I tell a little bit more about myself then?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
So I'm a junior in agricultural economics at Purdue University now. The project we did in Wyoming over this summer kind of led me into more of a conservation route with my major, and I've been completing research at Purdue involving the economic effects of chronic wasting disease in deer up in Wisconsin. So it all kind of ties together. There's a lot that impacts the economy within conservation, and studying livestock and conservation are almost one and the same.
Okay. Well, that's cool. I mean, that's all once again just way over my head. I grew up in a rural area, so I mean, I had friends that were involved in a lot of that, and with the 4-H type stuff, and and all that kind of stuff. But I never really had any kind of foot in that door, so to speak. So I mean, I find it all interesting, but at the same time, it's kind of hard for me to wrap my head around all the issues that go into it because I've never had to deal with it. So, I mean, what I keep hearing, and a big reason, so I've got a lot of friends now that are kind of converting to the vegetarian, like vegan route and all that kind of stuff, mainly because of what they promote and basically keep telling people about the overall waste of cattle and all that. I mean, so elaborate on that a little bit. I know this is kind of a little off topic of what we're going to eventually get into, but just satiate my own curiosity a little bit. How much of it is propaganda and how much of it is real? I mean, for someone that's actually dealt with it hands on for most of their life, I mean, what are the real ecological effects of having so much cattle and using so much meat to feed people?
Tanner, you want to take this one?
I guess how long do we have here? Yes,
as long as we want.
Well, so there's a couple things, and I know some vegetarian friends as well. They're great people. My opinion is they're somewhat misguided, I think. So I actually personally think that you're doing more good for the environment if you're eating cattle than you are if you're eating hummus or whatever else the vegetarians eat. So the thing is, I've looked at some of the studies they cite. The majority of cattle in this country are raised west of the Mississippi, where the ground is very arid, it's very dry, having water access is an issue. You can't really grow crops out where most of the cattle are, and what they're eating are the undigestible structural carbohydrates that you and I can't digest because we're not ruminant animals. So they're eating grass, they're eating forages, they're eating stuff like that, and they're converting it into protein that we can then eat.
Okay.
So a lot of the studies will talk about, well, we have to feed them this many pounds of, plant matter in order to get a pound of meat. Some of that's varied because we're really raising them to a mature weight on things that we can't eat. And then the last 180 days of their life, the cow will go to what's a feedlot, where they're then fed corn-based diet. Usually, it varies area to area. In Idaho, they feed a lot of potatoes that aren't good enough to make the McDonald's menu. So there's a lot of food waste that gets fed to them. So I don't think it's wasteful at all to eat cattle. And then, I mean, the fact of the matter is land is going to be used in the system that we have. We're going to use land in the way that we consider it to be most valuable to be used. So if you have areas where cattle are grazing, cattle are roaming free, that provides an economic incentive to keep those places a little bit more open. So in places like Florida, cattle ranches are really essential to the wildlife corridors that they have in that state so that endangered species can move throughout the state, because if you didn't have the cattle ranches there, then you would have subdivisions and you would have all sorts of animals would not be able to migrate like they used to. So that's a bit long-winded, but
no, that's exactly what I was looking for. Like, so, because all you hear basically is, all basically, the cow waste and everything
Right.
is just terrible for, the land. It's not so much the size of the land that you're grazing them on or anything like that. It's so much you always just keep hearing that it's all the waste that they produce is,
Right.
It was bad for the ecosystem, this, that, and the other. But at the same time, I've always kind of, I've always bought a little bit more, I think, more into the arguments of, you kill a lot more wildlife and
Right.
you're doing a little bit more harm by producing way more crops because of, there's so many rodents, rabbits, all these different things that you're actually killing
Right.
incidentally, by managing crops and stuff. But so I'm just like most secondhand bystanders. I don't know. I have no idea. So just to satiate my curiosity, like I said, I wanted to ask you guys about it because I don't know personally too many people like that are reliable sources, for agriculture. So all that being said, like I said, I appreciate the input because I have no idea. And like I said, if there's anything, is there any other points that you can think of, like why you would want one versus the other than just personal beliefs?
Well, there's a lot of a belief about inhumane treatment of animals. I think, I mean, I guess I'll let Dane jump in on some of that, but I personally think that's a little overblown. And then I guess a little bit about climate change. You know, people talk about methane that cattle produce. It's worth noting that when the Jamestown settlement was made, there were the same number of bison roaming free in this country than there are cattle right now. So there's not really been a change in large ruminant animals living on this continent. And I think some of those claims are a little bit overblown, but Dane might, I mean, did I miss something there, Dane?
Well, you did a very good job of taking an objective approach. Yeah. My own opinion on the matter, we don't have to get into that, but I think that utopian ideals really haven't gotten people too terribly far. If you look at historically speaking, at the end of the day, if a farmer thinks that he can make money off of cattle, you know, do it. You can't grow avocados in Nebraska. So it's just kind of the way it all works together in the ecosystem that you're in. Farmers have to work with the land they have and, you know, respecting the wildlife and everything there and the weather. And, you know, within a certain, you know, regulatory frame, you know, do what you want and eat what you want. So that's just my humble opinion on the matter.
No, I mean, I completely agree with that. I mean, in the end, people are going to have their preferences. I mean, as far as the beliefs and then just the overall preference and what someone wants to eat, I totally agree with that. I mean, I don't want anybody telling me that I can't eat a steak.
Right.
You know, just like I'm not going to tell any of my good friends that they should stop eating salads all the time or whatever. You know, I mean, but at the same time, I'm just like anybody else that, you know, I like to be informed, and you know, for the most part, that gives me a lot better idea than what I had before. I mean, and you brought up a really good point about the bison, which having had bison before, I wish that there were way more bison. I do too. I love Absolutely. Bison meat way more than cow. I think overall, I mean, I think it's even healthier for you too. Right. Speaking of which, I've been told before that for whatever reason, they don't have near the same amount of disease with bison being, you know, is cattle. Well, how much truth is in that? I don't know if it's just the blood type difference or what, but I've heard before that like a lot of the same cancers and other diseases that you run into with cows, you don't really find that so much in bison. Like, how much truth is there to that? Do you know anything about that, Dane? I've never heard that before, actually.
Well, the thing about wildlife populations is you could have the exact same you know, critters. You could have bison in captivity, and all of a sudden you start to discover these diseases because out in the wild they'll just die off, you know. Then you sample the ones who are still alive and they're the strong ones, and it's like, wow, bison are really healthy, you know, when they just didn't die. So
well, and it makes sense too from the standpoint also we don't mess with them as much, so you know, we don't obviously inject them with near as many hormones, antibiotics, and everything else at least I don't think we do with bison, do we? I mean, I have no idea. I've been told that we don't because the USDA regulations aren't involved near as much. But once again, I know Dane feels strongly about the hormone stuff. He may have a thing or two to say about that.
Any antibiotics or things like that are injected into beef for the cow's own good, and by the time it reaches the market, they've been worn off. I'd say the bigger issue to look at may be selective breeding. I mean, in dogs, look at like Chihuahuas can't properly have puppies, and bulldogs have all these health issues. Sure. If you really wanted to get into like a selective breeding standpoint, you could look at like cattle, like miniature cattle, and like why people breed them and like the health effects versus like a healthy, genetically diverse wild bison. I'm sure there's a difference there. But in terms of antibiotics or things like that, I don't think that would have any effect on a cow's health other than helping it.
So, I mean, as far as the belief system, as far as, you know, why, you know, kids are starting puberty so much younger and all that kind of stuff, do you buy into that argument as far as, you know, all these you know all the chicken and the beef that they ingest from an earlier age, you know, all the hormones and stuff that they might be, you know, eating secondhand from what we give these guys. I mean, so you don't really buy into that either?
I probably don't buy into that either.
Okay.
Honestly, kids just need to get outside more and eat some dirt and build up that immune system.
Well, I've got an 11-year-old that he is literally about 10 pounds lighter than me at this point and almost as tall already.
Yeah.
And he started into all that a year ago when he turned 10. And
Right.
I remember feeding him a heck of a lot of Tyson chicken tenders when he was young.
Yeah.
That's always what I joke about as far as that. But I mean, like I don't talk to enough people about this kind of stuff to really get a really educated, formal opinion on it. So, like I said, it really helps me to hear that. And, you know, I can understand where some people also might think that, well, I mean, obviously they've got a hand in all this stuff, so they're going to have a bias anyway and all that. But I mean, is there anything else that you can think of to really add to that?
Well, it may be worth noting, at least as you're talking about hormones and starting puberty early and all that stuff. As far as, so most animal species, it's actually illegal to inject hormones into them. It's been illegal for some time. You can't give injections to poultry. Can't give any, essentially the only livestock species where we use hormones are in cattle, and we only do that because we castrate them early, because it helps meat quality for eventually when that steer becomes a steak.
Sure,
and we'll implant a basically hormone device into their ear, which replaces some of the hormones that they would have naturally gotten from if they still had their testicles.
Right, but not so much as to make the meat overly tough and everything else.
Yeah, so we're not putting anything into them that they wouldn't naturally already have. And then obviously, since that's in their ear, that never gets eaten by a consumer. And there's been studies on, you know, how much hormones, quote unquote, you're getting from when you eat something. Comparing that to vegetables, you might, if you're worried about starting puberty early and estrogen levels, you might want to stay away from the celery and the kale and eat more beef would be my suggestion.
Well, that's something else that I was going to ask about too. I mean, with all the pesticides and everything else, quit hitting the table, Tanner.
My bad.
Didn't we just have this talk?
We did. Yeah.
No, it's all good. But yeah, I mean, I wondered just how much. I mean, I wondered if there was just as much, if not more, adverse things that we put on our crops with the pesticides and everything else that that we add and have to worry about, you know, like growing a successful crop. That is it really all that different? I mean, in the long and short of things,
right.
is it better or worse, or are we just doing ourselves a disservice equally, just in a different way?
Yeah, I honestly, my opinion on the whole thing is there's a lot of currency in fear mongering, and what gets a lot of clicks and likes on Facebook are people who make some outrageous claims about stuff we're eating. I mean, you can go all the way back to when Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle. That, you know, people care a lot about what they eat, and some of it's true. Yeah, absolutely, they should. But you know, some of the, even when we're talking about, you know, pesticides and herbicides that are sprayed on crops, you know, there's a lot of regulation that goes into that about when that can be sprayed, when it can't be sprayed. There's very little chance that you ever get any of that as a consumer. Dane, feel free to jump in on this if you'd like, but at least my understanding is we have by far the safest regulatory program in the world when it comes to our food production, and we have some of the safest food to eat in the world as well. So I don't necessarily buy into some of the fear mongering about, you know, spraying pesticides and spraying herbicides on crops, and especially not when it comes to beef. I definitely like my steak. So
it's an interesting case study, I suppose, to look at wildlife meat consumption in terms of bypassing totally the regulatory structure and just understanding what it's like to eat natural meat, kind of how it was back in the day. And the falconry community and the larger hunting community as a whole understands that better than anyone else. And it's interesting now that we're seeing this kind of subculture of hunters who are just, they kind of have hopped on that train that's like organic and no hormones, things like that. But at the end of the day, you got to feed the world, and not everyone can go out with a bird or a gun and catch dinner. And you have to have those cornfields and feedlots and cattle to feed the world. Also, people just eat what you want. It's don't overthink it.
All right, hope you all have been enjoying the second episode of Season 2 so far, and thank you to you all who have donated and helped support us and also bought our patches. The response to those continues to be awesome, and we are definitely still humbled and greatly appreciative of your support. And also, as always, thank you to Marshall Radio Telemetry for helping us to continue to bring these episodes to you all. All right, well, now it's time to turn it back over to Tanner and Dane and let them go a little bit more into their eagle depredation experience and what they found. So let's get back to it.
Well, I mean, I know, like I said, it's a little off topic, but thanks for humoring me on that anyway. But,
absolutely.
But getting back to the more of the subject matter at hand, so this all kind of inspired you guys once you found out about, the eagle situation and kind of where things are at with our ability to take eagles and the restrictions on everything involved with that. So explain then just how you guys wanted to, decide one day that, oh, well, I really want to get involved into this whole thing. Yeah,
right.
Like how did you get involved with the depredation aspect of it, and I mean just why you even wanted to mess with it, and just kind of go from there a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So I guess I'll say this kind of started for me by spending too much time on Facebook. I was scrolling through and saw an ad where they would be sending falconers and people interested in doing this study out to Wyoming to basically document eagle kills. And I lived in Wyoming for 2 years, absolutely loved it. I've been looking for a chance to get back ever since I left. And I saw this and said, oh, that sounds pretty neat. And I think the next day, Dane and I were smoking cigars somewhere, and I mentioned this, and then Dane figured he'd send in his application as well, and must have not had too high of standards because they picked both of us to go out there and do this. And
somebody's
that's kind of
do it.
absolutely. So that's kind of what got the ball rolling for us, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly right. For me, it was that sense of adventure. Someone says, why don't you go out the middle of Wyoming and sleep in a tent and not shower and walk 16 miles a day. Sign me up.
Yeah, it's not a joke either. We did walk 16 miles one of those days.
I can believe it. I've gone to Wyoming. Well, I've been through Wyoming a couple times, but a few years back, we all went to Wyoming to look for goshawk nests and stuff. So I mean, it's 16 miles is very easy to cover.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's a lot harder to cover once you get into the mountains and deadfall and all those issues. But so where exactly in Wyoming did you start doing this, and who did you get hooked up with to kind of steer you in the initial directions for it?
So we were about our territory that we covered was near Kemmer, Wyoming, which is the southwest portion of the state. Our territory ranged all the way from the border with Utah and then sort of over towards Green River, Rock Springs area. Yep. So we had quite a bit of ground to cover. Mostly though, it was centered around Kemmer.
All right. Well, so just how big was the area that you guys looked into, though? Like, what was the circumference of the area that you guys looked into for all this? Like, how much area did you actually explore and cover?
Probably several thousand square miles, if you want to think of it in square.
I don't know if it was quite that. You think it was that big?
Well, the area that we were driving around,
yeah.
The three main ranchers we were working with probably had upwards of 100,000 acres in total combined.
Yeah,
we were walking across.
Yeah, I don't even want to try to estimate exactly. All I know is it was a whole lot of land, and we spent spent quite a bit of time driving, and we would just try to spot bands of sheep from the road. And then once we saw them, we would then get out and hike our way back into some wilderness and try to see if we could find some lambs with them. But yeah, it was a good chunk of territory. We covered quite a bit, and we found out pretty early that there wasn't really a really efficient way to do it. We had kind of planned on early that we were going to sit up on a ridge and look for crows, look for eagles, look for something kind of flocking around to kill. That did not work out. Basically, what worked out the best for us is we found where the sheep were that had lambs, and then we just started working a grid pattern where we really couldn't see more than 3 to 5 feet in front of us sometimes in that sagebrush, and we would just walk in grids to try to cover as much ground as possible, see if we could find it, and just stumble upon, a dead lamb that had been killed by an eagle.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, I mean, my limited understanding about the subject is that's one of the major indicators that, I mean, as far as looking for, newborns and being able to differentiate whether or not it was a stillborn versus alive. Basically, there really wasn't much wear on the hooves, and you can tell it was, stillborn, and then you could really tell, well, whether or not it, if it had been fed on, if it was actually killed, or if it was just kind of like a carrion kind of,
right.
Dinner for the eagle or whatever the case may be. So kind of go into that a little bit.
Yeah, so the USDA was very strict about that. In one case, a little too strict, I think. But essentially what we had to do was we had to find this a lamb that had been killed first. And then we had to look, there were a few indications. They wanted to look at the hooves to see if they had dirt on it to kind of indicate that it had been up and walking around. They would look in the mouth to see if the tongue had been pulled out. So that's one of the first places an eagle wants to go, is they want to eat the tongue out when they kill a sheep or a lamb. And if they're stillborn, then they go into rigor mortis pretty quickly. So it's not very easy for an eagle to actually get into the lamb's mouth and pull that tongue out. But really the knockout, great, wonderful thing that we could find is if essentially an eagle, when it eats something, it starts kind of in the rib area. It'll clip kind of the ribs with its beak to where they're real short, and then it'll peel back the skin as it eats. So we found one of those. If we looked at the skin and found hemorrhaging from where the eagle talons punctured the back of the lamb, then that was an indication that the lamb was alive when it was grabbed by the eagle. And that was really, seemed to be, there was a lot of stress on that. And almost every lamb that we found and got confirmed as an eagle kill had that hemorrhaging. So we were pretty solid, if it has that it was actually killed by an eagle, not just fed on after it died.
Gotcha. Well, was there anything else that you guys looked for? I mean, was there any other animals that you looked for other than just lambs, or what other kind of livestock did you look for, if any?
Well, it was just lambs that we were looking for this particular project. There sure was a lot of other wildlife out there. I mean, half the time we'd be glassing a hill, and the sheep are hard to find. Out here we measure animals per acre. Out there it's acres per animal. And you get excited to see some sheep, and then you walk closer. It turns out it's just, several hundred more antelope than you've seen, yesterday. And
hated those guys.
Yeah.
Well, I thought like the amount of pronghorns and stuff that are out there is pretty amazing also. I mean,
it is.
The amount that you can just see just driving down, just the back road and all the prairie dogs and everything. I mean, if you ever just want to see a super diverse ecosystem, I mean, just all these different kinds of animals and just kind of a small amount of area. I mean, Wyoming's definitely one of the places to go.
Yeah,
absolutely. For sure. It's so nice out there, and it's really beautiful too. So you just want to go and appreciate nature. But so I'm sure that aspect of things made time go by a little bit better for you all when you're out there. But so I mean, how long did you guys take to gather all this data up? I mean, how long were you out there?
Yeah, so it was a 10-day project. So, and unfortunately, my sister was getting married directly after this study, so I had to be back in Indiana. So it was kind of a hard deadline we were working against. So yeah, we had essentially 10 days. And I guess, do you want us to back up a little bit and just kind of talk about what we were trying to accomplish during this?
Yeah. I mean, just however you guys want to take it. Like I said,
So essentially, this project was the result of a lot of collaboration between NAFA, between the International Eagle All-Stringers Association, The Wyoming Wool Growers Association was involved in this. Just a lot of people working together to try to make sure that we could get this to happen. And the goal was somebody in NAFA managed to get the ear of somebody who was important in the Interior, the Department of the Interior or somewhere, and essentially got 6 Golden Eagle permits to be issued to falconers, which hadn't happened in a long time. But we had to make sure to get an eagle, to get one of those permits, we had to find an area where eagles were actively killing livestock. So the higher ups that really pulled a lot of these strings together, identified these various ranchers where they knew eagle predation was happening, and then they put teams on the ground out there to go out and document that. So I think at the time of this study, I think 2 eagles had already been trapped. And then, so there were 4 permits that were still possibly available, and we had 3 different ranches and properties to work with. So really our goal, and Dane and I shared the same mindset about this. There was some grant money to cover gas to go out there. And a lot of people had donated to that. A lot of falconers had put money into that. And our mindset was that's a lot of hard-earned money that was being put towards this project, so we were going to do our best to make sure that every single one of those ranchers got a confirmed eagle kill on. And early on in the 10-day study that we had time to do this, Dane ended up finding one, and we were pretty ecstatic about that. But then kind of, I guess, towards the end of it, we kind of drug on. We didn't have any more confirmed kills, and things got a little bit more hairy towards the end. But that's essentially what we were trying to accomplish while we were out there, and to get those permits available for falconers.
Cool. So as far as the criteria to allow a falconer to come in and be able to trap an eagle on those properties, I mean, did it only take one kill, like one confirmed? What was the criteria for being able to be allowed to then follow up and then trap one?
Right. So I think in some cases they would only need one, but the more you had, the better it looked. At least that was my understanding. Was that kind of what you took away from it, Dane? Yeah.
You only need one, but like Tanner said, the more evidence you can show that there is an active eagle on that property, the better it is for the outcome.
Right. Sure. I can understand that. I mean, if you have a lot more confirmed kills and things like that, then you could justify doling out more permits. I can understand that. But
right.
So I mean, is there any other plans to do another branch of research on this? Are you guys thinking about going back out there and doing that again at some point, or is that at the end of it were you guys like, so that was really cool the one time we did it, but we'll just let somebody else do it the next time? Or
right. So I would jump at the chance to do this again. I absolutely loved it. If anybody else is out there listening and might have some interest in this, and I would highly recommend applying and going out there and doing that. That being said, it's kind of up in the air right now exactly what's going to happen for this coming year. So essentially at the beginning of the year in January here, we had the Eagle Lottery happened, and 10 falconers were picked to be able to be eligible to go out and trap eagles out west. Really what I talked to Mike Barker a few days ago, who's the president of the International Eagle Ostrichers Association. He was telling me the plan is to really have those 10 people spearhead this project coming up here this next summer to try to get permits taken, and because they're the ones who really stand the most to gain or lose based on how this goes. As of right now, only 5 of those falconers have contacted Mike Barker or anybody in NAFA. So if anybody's out there listening and they've drawn an eagle permit but haven't contacted anybody, or know of somebody who drew an eagle permit, would highly recommend you getting in contact with your NAFA director or Mike Barker if you can through the IEAA. But essentially it hasn't been planned out yet exactly what's going to happen, if it's going to be a similar study or not. But we ended up through our study, we had confirmed eagle kills on every ranch, and we had permits issued. Unfortunately, we're kind of starting from square one again this next year. Long story short, no eagles were taken for falconry based off of the permits that we had established there. And the people doing the study had asked for an extension of those permits so that we could have a longer trapping window to get those birds off there, especially before lambing, which is really when the ranchers want them off. They want it to be a proactive thing, not a reactive thing. The USDA or whatever bureaucracy was involved in this said that you'd had to file 2 separate $100 applications to try to ask for that. So they filed both of those, and then both of those applications were promptly denied. So we are starting from square one next year. So we're going to need to do a different study, I would imagine, and get out there and get some more confirmed lamb kills or eagle kills.
So then, if you find different data at that point, then I mean, could the amount of potential permits be less, or I mean, how will that affect things then?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. So it sounds to me that, and you know, I don't know anybody involved. It sounds like the 6 eagle permits that have been issued, that they're kind of the people in charge are reluctant to increase that very much or decrease that. I would imagine if we don't find 6 places where eagles are killing sheep, then we won't get 6 permits. But you know, I would like to see that number increased. We have estimates I found between 20 and 30,000 golden eagles in the United States. It's estimated 300 to 500 of those are killed by windmills every year. The government issues 18 permits to the Hopi Indians to take eagles and eat them. But when it comes to falconry, you know, we're saying, pretty please, will you let us have 6 permits to trap a golden eagle, train it, do what it would normally do in the wild naturally, and then one day release it. So it seems like there's a little bit of pushback from somewhere in the government. You know, it's always hard to pinpoint exactly where that is. But as of right now, I don't know. I don't see us in the future expanding from the 6 or 10 or whatever permits we have this year anytime soon.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I was curious whether or not they would try and reduce the number or not.
Right,
mainly,
right.
You know, like, so if they were going to have valid data each year to justify that set number, or if they were just going to kind of keep it that number for now, because like you said, there's not been, they're not all going to get filled every year. Well, I won't say that they won't, but I mean, the chance of them all being filled each year, every year, at least in the short term, I know is probably not, the odds of that happening probably aren't that high, but.
Well, we have plenty of areas where eagles are killing sheep. We have plenty of areas where we could theoretically trap one. And this last year, out of the 6 permits that were issued, we got 4 eagles for falconry. So, you know, I think it's feasible to fill all those permits,
Okay.
but it's never a guaranteed, you
Yeah,
know,
well,
as
well,
everything in falconry is.
Well, knowing that, then that makes it a little bit more plausible then.
Right,
I think, yeah,
right.
because I mean, 4 can easily become 6.
Yeah, I hope so. Hope so.
Well, and hopefully at some point again, after people experience this for, you know, a certain number of subsequent years, then maybe the mindset, like you said, will kind of be encouraged to maybe change the outlook as far as, well, we should be allowed to, you know, fly these birds just like, you know, most of the other birds that we have in falconry, just because, you know, I mean, it's not an endangered species, and
Right.
I mean, the take and trapping, you know, procedure should be, you know, pretty similar for them, because that's kind of what our you know, legislature is for the rest of the birds, and you know, falconry
Right.
and stuff too. As long as you have an appropriate license and have jumped through all the hoops, you know, the idea hopefully will eventually kind of migrate maybe towards, well, we should be able to, you know, take eagles just the same, or kind of go back to that, or you know, so hopefully that's where things will kind of start to steer more towards. So I agree with that.
We can only hope. Only hope.
Well, cool. So, I mean, is there anything else that you can think of that would be interesting that kind of came from the study to kind of add real quick before we
You got anything, Dane?
change topics again? Or?
Well, there's so much that we could talk about. Just, you know, like Tanner was saying, just the whole adventure of it all. We ended up seeing moose and elk and all sorts of things out there.
A badger.
A badger that scared the hell out of Tanner. I thought it must have been a rattlesnake, or I don't know. But Tanner, do you have anything else you want to add?
You know, just probably want to say extremely grateful that we had the opportunity to go out there and do that. Hopefully, Hopefully we did some good, even though eagles weren't taken from that specific study area. But really grateful to the ranchers out there who are growing sheep, who let us onto their land, who are really hospitable about everything. I'd say if people are looking to help out this study in the future, I would imagine it's possible, maybe even probable, that there will be another GoFundMe page here within the next couple months once things start getting organized for another study. Until then, always, I would recommend, maybe it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, reach for some of the sheep meat when you're in Walmart and looking for something for dinner, because those folks really have a tough living out there, and they make sure that, when they're running sheep and putting an economic incentive on the land, we saw all sorts of wildlife out there with the sheep. They're really good stewards of the land out there, and I would say eat more sheep. So
and wear wool clothing too.
Yeah.
Well, is there going to be any other states that are going to be more actively involved in this than just Wyoming, or is there going to be? Well, at least in the short term, anyway.
Right. So I believe that 2 eagles were taken from Utah, I think, this year, if I'm correct. So
okay.
There were 2 taken outside of the state of Wyoming, but the way that it was explained to me is that in the past, the state of Wyoming has been really hospitable towards falconers. They've been really nice about letting us go in there and trap birds and working with us through the Eagle Project. So the idea has kind of been to focus on Wyoming, because not only do we have a lot of sheep ranchers there that we can confirm eagle kills on, and a large population of golden eagles, but we also have a state that if we can kind of streamline the bureaucracy and just deal with one state bureaucracy and getting these permits issued, might be, a little bit more efficient to do that rather than have eagle take in 6 or 7 different states. But, like we were talking about earlier, I would like to see this maybe not normalized, but somewhat come closer to a normalized falconry take, to where we don't have to go through this every year. And if that's the case, I think, it'd be wonderful to have it opened up to multiple states. But for right now, it just kind of makes more sense to focus our energies in one state and make sure. And there's a lot of eagles to trap in Wyoming. So
cool. Well, that makes sense. I totally get that. But so as far as your personal falconry career, you're going to be going back to Texas here shortly, right?
Yes, sir.
In about a week or so.
Yes, sir. About a week.
Yeah. So, what are you going to plan on doing? Are you going to be birdless for a bit still because of all the schooling, or what's your next plans?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the plan is to be birdless, at least in the near future here, which is really eating me up on the inside. But if I don't have the time for a bird, don't have the time for a bird.
Sure.
But yeah, that's the plan right now. Finish law school, and then maybe end up in a position where I can have a little bit more ability to practice falconry is the idea.
Well, sure. Yeah. You shouldn't have a bird if you don't have time to fly it. I totally agree with that.
Right. Absolutely.
But, and then Dane, we kind of talked about maybe, the prospects of you transitioning to the dark side, so to speak, at some point. But, you really have any interest of making it, or do you just like being able to put your gun up at the end of the season and not worry about it anymore?
I definitely have an interest in getting into falconry at some point. Maybe I'll graduate college here in a year and a half and make some money or something and get into it if I have a little more time. But, my experience with going to field meets here in Indiana and just flying a bird with Tanner have been great. The falconry community in Indiana and in Wyoming, everywhere I've been, has been very welcoming to me as a non-falconer.
Yeah, obviously we're biased because we're from Indiana, but I truly believe that we do have a very good club here, and for the most part, everyone is pretty accommodating and very helpful. So. Right. But at any rate, guys, we're almost out of time. Well, not necessarily out of time, but we're almost at that hour-ish time. Right. So, any last thoughts before we take off and I have to drive a wonderful, another 4 hours home and all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, I'd just like to echo the sentiment of gratitude for the whole project. Talking about getting interested in more states and navigating that bureaucratic ladder that you have to climb. It'd be great to see like a grassroots effort of falconers and citizens and just those in the interest of the area support the falconry community and support ecology and conservation of these great birds. Just I'm really full of gratitude to the ranchers as well. It's a great project. I'd encourage anyone else to do it.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. And, just thinking back to a previous episode and talking about Indiana, there was a fellow Hoosier falconer named Greg Thomas that was on this podcast and talked a lot about solidarity amongst falconers. And I really think that kind of captures what we, did here and were able to accomplish in this Eagle project. Dane and I were just kind of the foot soldiers to go out there and do the dirty work of finding lambs. But I mean, really, the falconry community came together, I think, about this. When we were, just going out to Wyoming, a falconer, Gerhard Spalding, who had never met us, never knew who we were, just opened up his home to us to let us stay there. Stephanie Ashley was wonderful about being out in the field with us, working, putting in the work before we got there to make sure we had the relationships with the ranchers. While we were out there, Mike Barker and Sheldon Nicole did a whole lot of work to make sure that everything was bureaucratically in order for this to happen. So I'm just grateful for everybody. And there's kind of a comment that was made when we first arrived in Wyoming that kind of sticks in my mind about Mike Barker mentioned that he was really pleasantly surprised that so many Eastern falconers had donated to the GoFundMe page because, maybe there's certain areas, but for the vast majority of Eastern falconers, there's not the space or ability to fly an eagle. But nonetheless, they donated money to make sure that falconers out west could have access to eagles. And I just think that says a lot about the falconry community and what we're able to accomplish when we work together. And then when you throw in the fact that the Wyoming Wool Growers Association and ranchers out in Wyoming were willing to work with falconers and accept us onto their land and into their lives, I'm just really grateful for all the moving parts that came together in this, and it makes me excited about the future of falconry. For all of our falconry politics and disputes every now and then, we sure can come together around something and do a lot of good.
Well, I mean, and we have to. I mean, because where there's not very many of us, so I mean, right. Unfortunately, even though there is a divide at times, it's not something our community can absorb very well.
Absolutely.
I mean, like I said, we kind of have to be united regardless, and I think for the most part we do a good job of it whenever the time comes. So, but regardless, I mean, thank you all so much for providing the input. I mean, it was very well prepared on your part as far as the data and everything. I appreciate you sharing your experiences with all that with me, and like I said, hopefully we can do this again another time.
Absolutely.
And maybe it'd probably be a little bit harder to throw together since you're going to be the opposite end of the country, but
right.
But we find a way to make it work usually. So.
Absolutely.
But thank you guys again so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And safe travels back to Texas and all that kind of good stuff. So
thank you. Safe travels back home today.
Yeah, I'll try my best. So all right, thanks guys.
Thanks.